Welcome to the Mining Pulse, checking the heartbeat of African mining. Every week we gather the specialists, run the diagnostics, and give you the market intelligence you need. What's running hot? What's flatlining? What are the vital signs telling us?
I'm Graham.
And I'm James.
And it's time to take the temperature of the industry. Let's get started. Today's episode takes us into mining's most important and rapidly evolving conversations. What's happening to the enormous volumes of waste that mining leaves behind? And how the industry is beginning to reimagine that waste, not as a liability, but as an opportunity. Joining us today, we have two specialists working at the frontier of tailings repurposing.
One has been here before, the other one is new. I'll start with the new one. Dr. Nicolene Roux holds a master's in chemical and metallurgical engineering, as well as a PhD in technology management and innovation. She's a project engineer at Fraser, where she leads initiatives in innovation, sustainability, and something called circularity as part of the NextGen group. She actively develops solutions across fines beneficiation, dewatering, tailings deposition, and importantly, repurposing. Nicolene is also a research associate at the University of Pretoria's Graduate School of Technology Management. With active research and industry engagement since 2013, she brings deep expertise in technology development, mining, and tailings innovation. Phildre is a returning guest, for those of you who remember. He's a general manager at Fraser in charge of projects and business development. He's a mineral processing engineer with more than 30 years of experience, and Phildre has spent the last 17 years at Fraser across business development and mineral processing plant projects. He's also a passionate member of the NextGen team, where he focuses on finding innovative solutions that unlock real value from mine waste. Together, Nicolene and Phildre bring a rare combination of academic rigor, industry application, and policy awareness to what is to become one of mining's most strategically relevant topics. Nicolene, Phildre, welcome to the Mining Pulse.
Thank you. Thanks.
So, Nicolene, let's start with the basics for listeners who might be new to this topic itself. So what exactly is mining waste or mining tailings? And what do you mean when we talk about tailings repurposing?
Okay, thanks, Graham. I think that's an important place to start, just to set the scene, because even in industry, there might be a little bit of confusion. If we talk about tailings, it is the material that stays behind after processing. So if you think about an open cast mine and you want to access the ore body, you first remove the soil from the top soil, and then the rest of the overburden, whether it's blasting or whatever you use to actually extract that material. So then you've got your waste rock, and then suddenly you get to your ore body. So that ore body you then remove, you put it through a process. From the process you get your product, and then you also get your tailings portion of it, so your processed tailings. That's what we're going to specifically focus on today. So the tailings portion of the mining waste. There's other types of mining waste. You get your wastewater, which is also a great opportunity, but we're specifically going to focus on the tailings portion of it. And then getting to the second part of your question is what is repurposing? So tailings valorization as a whole can be seen as an umbrella term, where you've got any value that you can generate from that, which includes tailings recovery, extracting your primary minerals from that resource. But today we're going to focus specifically on the repurposing section, which is going to be to take that material that's on the surface and to transform it into value through a means or a thing that was previously not even considered, such as your building materials and so forth. So I hope that gives you a big introduction to the topic.
It does. And I've actually seen a few of these before, especially here on the Western Limb, where the old smelters, the guys are now starting to go back and repurpose the old tailings, the slag tailings.
Yes. I would like to just stand still on that. So that is more your metallurgical waste or metallurgical tailings. That includes, for example, your fly ash and your metallurgical slag waste. And those have been repurposed for centuries. I mean, there's actually a economic value to those. Those things were initially sold for or given away for free. But these days, those have now grown into a whole industry, and that's already been matured. The metallurgical waste, the slags, and the fly ash. So yes, that's a different component to the mine tailings, which goes before you actually upgrade it to a product.
Okay. So globally, around 13 billion tons of tailings are added to surface storage facilities every year. That volume doesn't reduce even when the material is reprocessed. How do you see tailings repurposing as part of that solution to that growing volume problem?
Another good question. So you've just mentioned two things that gets confused also a lot in industry. So the one is the recovery, where if you repurpose or you remine tailings material, you have the opportunity, and this is what's being done in South Africa for the gold and the platinum, where they recover grams per tons. So that same volume of material that you've actually reprocessed goes back to the surface. So that's not a big volume reduction opportunity right there. And in waste, there has been developed a hierarchy for waste. It's not only for tailings, it's in general for all waste streams. So it's quite a familiar graph, but I'm going to explain it to you in the sense of in tailings, where they've created, they call it the mine waste hierarchy. So at the top, it's an inverse pyramid, this mine waste hierarchy. So at the top, you've got the elimination of tailings. And this is the most sustainable thing that we want to do if we talk about volume reduction. We don't want to put any volume of material on the surface. So that would be your ideal quick fix. That rarely happens, and we're still developing technologies how to do in situ leaching and then bringing that material to the surface and not having any waste. But that is still far in the future, but that's so on a sustainability scale, that's where we want to get. The second tier in this pyramid is your reduction. So how do you efficiently actually mine material, focusing on that course, that seam, where you've got your ore, and creating less material on the surface. So that's reduction. The third stream on this hierarchy is where we're going to focus today. It's repurposing. You've got this volume of material on the surface. How do you take that and reduce it by creating an additional product from that? So that's the repurposing sort of it. The one underneath that, so you've got more volume of materials being set on the surface, is your recovery. That is the gram per tons, and you can still have the same amount. You process this tailings storage facility, you extract X grams per ton, but still 99% of the volume of materials on the surface. And then the two layers that's below that, and we're not going to go into too much detail, but the one is the storage, which includes putting the material on the surface. We'll get to it one day when it makes economic sense. Or you can carbon capture and mineral carbonation, where you put CO2 into that material to store it and convert it into a carbonate type of material. And lastly, you get remediation. Now, remediation is also a very interesting topic because you do sit with these large volumes of material, but you can't reduce the volume through one of the above that I've just mentioned. So you've got remediation, which is making it safe for human use, building a soccer field on top of it, building a solar plant on top of it. But this is hypothetical thinking, but those are the volume reduction options that we're sitting with.
I'm glad you've explained it like that, Nicolene, because I'm now all of a sudden even more excited about this conversation we're going to have today, because all the conversations I've had historically around tailings reprocessing has been focused on extracting a little bit more value out of the tailings that was lost in the initial process. And it's typically, as you say, grams per ton. It's a little bit of the same products that they've been trying to strip out in the process of creating the tailings that they just try and do again. But what you're talking about seems like a holistic view of this tailings deposit to say, well, what else can we do with it? Not only just reprocess it and extract a little bit more PGMs or gold, but what do we do with the bulk of it? And I can't wait to hear what you guys are working on.
Yeah. And it actually leads into, and I'm glad that you took the airtime on this one to start, because it leads into the next question. So you've mentioned predominantly gram per ton. So assuming that a lot of this work currently is very much gold related, and maybe that's because of our landscape for our listeners here in Johannesburg and South Africa, where we've got many, many old gold dumps sitting here. So is this currently where this is being done currently?
So yes, if you talk about the recovery of the gram per ton in this scenario and not the repurposing, yes. So in a lot of the situations, but it is important. So something has to pay for the project, right? So your gold, with the gold prices that we currently have, it's a very important component. So if you are considering repurposing, you have to focus on that primary mineral and So that's basically going to probably pay for your whole project. But then if your goal is to repurpose and then to create a product from it, you must look at that commodity as a whole. Look at what is in that tailings material. Is it, for gold in our situation, South Africa, it could be radioactive, which actually decreases your chances of actually creating a product from it. But yeah, there's several options that you can actually apply to reduce the volume. And the big thing that you can consider is low value, high volumes, which is in your construction industry, taking that material and repurposing into it to like in a block, for example, or in a brick or in pavers. Or you can go for the high value, low volume type of, such as your very purified, highly beneficiated sands or silicates, which are used in certain industries. So yes, gold is a platinum as well in South Africa is something that's being recovered on a large scale. But again, that's not repurposing. That's extracting your primary mineral again, going back into that same resource as you're tailing and extracting secondary value from it, and then reducing the volume through repurposing opportunities. That's what we need to develop.
And then maybe for you, Phildre, this has historically been a very niche technology concept. Why has tailings repurposing only now moved into a strategic mainstream? And what's driving this shift?
Yeah, thanks, Graham. So one of the big drivers in the industry is the global industry standard for tailings management, or the GISTM, as we refer to it commonly. And one of the goals of the GISTM is to reduce the risk of tailings storage facilities. And one means of doing that is to reduce volume, the volume of tailings and the volume of water that are stored on the external facilities. So repurposing actually is a very good opportunity to try and repurpose the material so that you can reduce volume. Not only in isolation where you transfer tailings and you make a new product, but where you combine it with what we've just discussed. In other words, primary and secondary mineral extraction, and you combine this whole value chain so that it in total it makes economic, environmental, social sense. And that's one of the big drivers. Also, globally, it's like there's a growing social conscience, and we see that societies are much more vocal and are pushing when it comes to the approval of projects. For example, people are not going to push a project through just because it adds financial value. If it isn't socially and environmentally responsible, it's not going to go ahead. And we see this especially in the mature economies, in the Europes and so on, where it's actually common for them to really support projects where these other elements are positive, rather than whether it's just a financial viable project.
And maybe for the listeners, please go and watch the episode with JJ around ESG, which will give even more background to exactly what Phildre is saying around the importance of ESG. And it's very interesting to hear that, just how important that social part is actually becoming in tailings management, because often these tailings dams are encroaching onto communities as well. And we've seen many disasters that have come up in the past. We spoke about that a bit previously.
That's right.
But are you seeing then the need for maybe more partnerships with mines, especially in repurposing, the likes of, for example, the aggregate industry, an Afrimat, for example, joining up with a mine to repurpose their tailings to sands or gravels, or, is that maybe something that the industry should be doing more of?
Yeah, I was going to say.
I'll maybe respond first. Absolutely. I think that looking at tailings in isolation, or one particular tailings in isolation, obviously limits what you potentially can repurpose that material to. If you broaden your view and you say, well, if we could add other tailings or other waste streams to this with an end goal in mind, you start opening up other opportunities. So there are really opportunities to look at tailings differently, and it goes back to actually, there's a lot of talk about it, but actually saying this tailings that we see on surface is a resource. not a resource which is constrained by its history of how it became there, but it's a resource and it needs to be looked in its own right. What are the things that it can be used for?
Yeah, and sometimes it's not the mine themselves that can come up with the solutions, which is why it's important what you guys are doing at Fraser.
It also, another component of that is the technology developers, James. So it is small, innovative companies, universities that does the research, that's got the time to do that fundamental work and to get those solutions. And then, it's a stakeholder thing. I think there's two things that I want to mention. So identifying the stakeholders, like you said, whether it's external people and everybody coming together to get that solution. And the second big thing is the market. How do you enter a market where you're going to compete with existing suppliers for that material? So that's another big thing which I hope we're going to unpack in a bit.
Yeah. So why haven't we seen more large-scale commercial success, though? Is it still being a lot of study development work, or are there real barriers that are coming forward in actually moving this into proper tailings repurposing?
Yeah, so you are 100% right. There's been so much research actually on this. I mean, the repurposing concept of that, people have been, the fundamental research that I've just mentioned, they've been going for more than 30 years. All of the universities in South Africa have done it. It's not that nothing has been done in South Africa around it. But the problem is, there's so many gaps and barriers. For example, if we now as Fraser want to go and repurpose a facility, number one, there's so many abandoned facilities, and then none of those have got characteristics. None of them has been drilled. We don't have access to the information of what's actually in those facilities. So that's actually one of the major barriers that's preventing us to find solutions for it. So that's one thing that we definitely need to fix. Something else that we need to consider is the mineralogy. So if we don't know what's in there, even if we had access to it, tailings is heterogeneous. It's not homogeneous. So yes, some people say tailings is homogeneous. It's got an SG of this as a bulk unit that's there, but it's not. We don't know how much of that material has maybe leached out. We don't know how the tailings pond has built in the beginning. So there's certainly a lot of unknowns on the mineralogy side. And then I would also say there's so many that I'm going to want to mention, but the next one that I'm going to mention because I think it's crucial. So far, we've just said volume reduction, but it's only an opportunity if it makes sense and if your market is actually going to take your material. What is economics of scale? Will you be able to create enough to a client that will take enough at a low enough cost? Are you actually competitive in this field? And will your client actually take, or your market take that material? There's a major liability if you talk about tailings. It could be radioactive, like we've mentioned, for the uranium in the gold tailings. Would your market actually take that material? Who does the liability sit with at the end? So most of these opportunities that we discuss, there still is a component of beneficiation. So you will take the tailings from the mine, let's say it's free at this stage, you're going to upgrade it through a beneficiation process, and then there would probably be another waste product that's going to be generated. So who needs to manage that waste? If you give it back to the mine, is their current permits still applicable to that material, or have you concentrated all the hazardous materials? There's seriously so many barriers that we still need to cross.
So you've mentioned some barriers, but let's maybe talk successes. And maybe you are working maybe with current companies doing this repurposing, and maybe this is the time to shout out to them. But who is doing this successfully already?
So I think the successes in industry at the moment is on two levels. You get the successes on the floor, on the ground, which is the people basically fulfilling or closing the barriers gaps that I've just mentioned. So this could be people leading the characterization, gathering by databases on the different mineralogy. So I think that's a major success. And also, I must say, the societal drive to actually work on this. This is globally, it's being enabled for us to actually focus on creating an industry for repurposing. If we go into companies where there's a handful of companies that has actually made an economic or a business case from this, and one example shout out that I would like to do is with Vale. So Vale has, from their iron ore, they've created a product called ore sand or sustainable sand, where they specifically take it as a byproduct from the beneficiation. So intercepting the hot tails that comes from the initial iron ore extraction, and then creating a sustainable sand or sand product which they actually sell in the market, and they've actually convinced their market that this is a good product to take. So that's one very good example. And there's also companies such as Rio Tinto that's made synthetic aggregates that's competitive with crushed rock. But all of this, it takes a lot of qualification, certification, and time to actually get them to those products.
Yeah. Shout out to both Vale and Rio Tinto then.
There's other companies as well, but those are the first two that comes to mind and really doing groundbreaking work. But there's definitely other companies. We are also working with several companies, like you said, in the characterization areas, in the brick making facilities that's contacted us as well that wants to explore opportunities. So there's many more, but limited real life examples.
When I just started in the industry, Nicolene, there was probably one or two companies that were doing some tailings reprocessing. I remember Platinum Mile. They were one of the first ones, I think, to stick some extra flotation cells and things at the back of the platinum industry. They seem to have done well, but those have been few and far between. When I was in Australia, there was one company that was doing something on coal tailings. There seemed to be a lot of potential, but very few companies managed to do it successfully. And I think maybe the missing piece was that holistic view of what else can we do with the bulk of the tailings, which is exciting that you guys are looking at that. Yeah. And it is something that's growing in South Africa now. I see more and more tailings reprocessing facilities opening in South Africa. So there must be some local success stories there as well.
Yeah, James, you take me back with Platinum Mile. So it's one of the contracts that Fraser used to operate on. It's since moved on in terms of ownership because there was a lot of change in the PGM landscape in South Africa. But some fond and some difficult memories there. But maybe just to add to some of the local successes in terms of repurposing. So repurposing goes back actually quite a way in the South African history, and even globally there's other successes. So, for example, locally, Afrisam is a company that we can mention. They use blast furnace slag from the steel mills, and they actually use it as a clinker replacement. So clinker is quite a high carbon intensive process to produce. So they use it as a clinker replacement in the manufacturing of their cement. In addition to that, there's been ferrochrome slag, which has been used as aggregates and for road building.
Yep.
And then quite common is the use of fly ash. So the power stations that burn coal produce fly ash. The fly ash can be used as a substitute for the cement, up to between 20 and 30% in the concrete product that you make. So there are real world examples. They're unfortunately not very varied. I mean, a lot of them come down to I'm going to say, let's say, building materials or construction type materials, but it shows you that there are opportunities that need to be explored and expanded on.
Yeah, and I mean, if you take a lot of the talk this year with mining in Durban, everyone is saying it's Africa's time. And if you look at the expansions that people are talking about, it's infrastructure, roads and buildings and schools and everything that goes around that. If we're able to repurpose all of this, as you say, into the building industry, all of a sudden we're able to resource our own development and growth.
Yeah.
The other thing we always see around mines and new mines is they're normally in places where there's not a lot of people, and then within a very short period of time, that community grows exponentially. Yeah. So you've got a whole bunch of informal and formal settlement happening around mines. Wouldn't it be great if more mines can use the tailings to make bricks and build houses for people instead of just creating a big dam?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Definitely. Yeah. There's several models that can incorporate something like that. Yeah.
So, Phildre, as digital tools and AI start moving into mining, and I think we spoke a bit about it on the previous episode as well, how are they starting to help us to identify or rank or de-risk the tailings repurposing and those opportunities specifically as we move forward now?
Yeah, thanks, Graham. Not an easy one. Basically, a lot of the repurposing processes, it's pretty much still uncharted territory, and it's being developed as we speak. But I think it's safe to say that on the basis of evaluating whether tailings storage facilities have the potential to be repurposed, you need to understand what the mineralogy of those facilities are. And if that information is captured, preferably for the tailings storage facility itself, but even for the host ore from which those tailings were produced, then things like AI, which has the ability to handle large data very quickly, very efficiently, can assist you in narrowing your search, to try and match a tailings to a specific product that you're targeting. So I think it has to be said, AI is not a replacement for sound technical judgment, but it's an incredible tool to handle big data very quickly and to also pull data together and analyze data from different sources that traditionally would have been siloed. Now you can put this together and you can have an holistic view of how do you put things together. An example, if you could identify a fly ash in an area where there's also slag relatively close by, and you can combine that with tailings and you produce an aggregate. Now you've actually produced an aggregate from 3 different sources, and you haven't had to mine or disturb any new resource to do that.
Yeah. And it sounds so simple, right? And again, I'm going to refer to a previous discussion with JJ where we were talking around transparency and be able to have this data available, which is, even in that conversation, is very difficult actually, where people maybe don't want to show the data, or historically there isn't any available. So I suppose it's getting people on board to say that it is a good thing to have the data available. It is secure, it is safe, which I think in the future will help to unlock more of these opportunities if those minds are willing to, as you say, share the big data.
Yes. I think there's a role to be played by industry, government, and I think Nicolene can maybe say something about that and the successes in an Australian context. But maybe just to add that there's also the role that AI and digitalization is going to play in complex processing. None of the processes, or few of the processes that we are talking about now, have been combined and put together to give you these products. So they're going to need very good process control, and efficiency is going to be key. And I think that's also where there's going to be a big contribution of, for example, AI in those optimization of processes.
So you're also giving the youngsters who are leaving school a carrot of a direction to go into, right? So hopefully this comes out to them to be attractive as a future role for the younger generation to come into.
Yes. We often look, and I think if I was a young metallurgist now, geometallurgy and really understanding how the geology and the mineralogy links up and having a broad-based view of that is going to be such a game changer in our future.
Well, hopefully in a couple of years' time, 10 years' time, we're going to hear some success stories from some of the youngsters saying that you guided their decision into geometallurgy.
I hope so.
And we want to hear those stories in 10 years' time. So what would now be a practical digital starting point for mines sitting with legacy tailings? I mean, you've just spoken around that geometallurgy. So from a remote African location with limited connectivity or infrastructure, what are they going to have to start doing, or how do we start to build this infrastructure of knowledge and data?
So my advice is that, tailings has not traditionally been a point of focus. My advice would be, even if you have an existing tailings dam, from this day forward, start looking and understanding your tailings and keep records of what are you depositing and where are you depositing that material. It's the first question that is asked is, is there an opportunity in either reprocessing and or repurposing this material? the first question that you need to answer is, well, what does it consist of? And if there's no data or very limited records available, it makes it incredibly costly, because now you have to go and sample and drill. And tailings facilities, for example, drilling comes with its own problems. Just putting a drill rig on a facility is not always safe and possible. So that would be, for me, the starting point. If you look at piecing together history, there's been phenomenal work that's been done on piecing together, for example, tailings storage facility history from satellite images, where these have been analyzed, where advanced techniques, AI, for example, has been used to piece together how tailings facilities have actually grown and developed over time. And if that can be matched to the production profile, then at least you can get a sense of what was being treated, what part of the ore body was being deposited in the tailings. And that would be my advice, the starting point. But critically is to actually treat your tailings as a resource now.
Yeah. And I suppose then that's a call out to mines as well, because not everybody samples their tailings. Often they will sample feed and they will sample product, but not always tailings. So maybe this is the call for them to add good samplers into their processes now.
Yep.
Yeah, I would like to just tie back to what Phildre also said with this. Now that you've got the information, what do you do with it? And do you make that freely available? And the example that he mentioned about Australia and how they're actually leading in this field. So what they've done is they've afterwards gone and they've realized that they didn't take these samples. They didn't build the databases that we've just mentioned. So the government actually funded a campaign where they collected this data and they created a database that's freely available with some of this information. And the companies actually agreed to get this information published. Yes, there's some limitations of it, but it's really a good example of big data being readily available and being used for the greater good, to be able to make your assumptions, to be able to say, okay, at least I think there's X, Y, and Z in this deposit. And also initially you thought, okay, I'm going in only for copper, and that's where the analysis stopped. You need to look at the full range of possibilities. Which other critical raw materials are actually within that potential facility? So collecting
Nice
all
to
the
hear
data.
an example of a government actually doing something useful.
Yes, no, James, they really, the model that they've applied, I hope it is something that we can bring over to our country in the future. It's definitely something that we could benefit from.
Yeah.
I want to switch back to community, Graham.
Please.
We mentioned before that mines are typically in remote areas, but there's inevitably a community that forms around the mine, often rural, often people with not the best skill set or education. So how is it possible, if we're going to repurpose tailings and reprocess and look at that? We hear in the chrome industry, for instance, of a lot of the chrome guys are selling or giving tailings to communities, in inverted commas, and then they're supposed to do something with it. Often these communities reach out to us and say, well, is there a way you can help us make some money out of what we've been given? But it's not as easy as it looks, especially for these communities who don't have access to capital and don't have access to the skill set that you need to effectively do it. But what does meaningful sort of community benefit look like?
Yeah, very good question, James. I think your point is so valid. I mean, communities and the people in the communities are no longer satisfied with, job creation, skills development, even preferential procurement. It's not what they're after. I mean, communities want to see holistic community upliftment. They don't want to see enrichment of individuals. And that is key as an enabler for repurposing and reprocessing and repurposing with that. But it needs to take an holistic view where all the stakeholders are brought along in the process right from the start of this process. You can't actually implement a project and then try and as an afterthought bring the community on board. If you look at these projects, yes, a successful project can add broader value, like, for example, let's say water and power to a community. But what the community really needs is an equity stake in a project. And they often don't have the means to do that. So it needs a view where you can put a special purpose vehicle or a trust or some form of financial structure in place that allows the community to participate in the long run to the benefit of the community. But the community also needs to be given the opportunity to fulfill real value chain activities. Things like marketing and sale of products and transportation of those products to market. Those are real opportunities. Those are things that need to happen, and they're critical aspects, especially of repurposing projects. The transport component and moving the product to market is a key component. And that's where communities need to be brought in and aligned and bring their value to the project.
Yeah, and I think if I go back to what you were saying as well, I think that whole value chain, again, leads back to that ESG platform. And for both the investors, even the regulators, I think it starts to create a different way of thinking into how do we really repurpose this? How do we create platforms for, as you say, communities to really benefit out of a byproduct? If I want to, and I say byproduct in the sense of repurposing, but actually properly repurposing this, and not as like James was saying, where it's just, well, here's a tailing and you reprocess it, because again, you're still left with a tailing that must go somewhere again. They're not. I don't think they're not properly repurposing that whole tailings. So I think it's that ESG compound or portion is going to drive a real critical role in actually growing repurposing. There's a strong position that the repurposing should be designed from the beginning, and you mentioned that it's not an afterthought or not applied later. But how would that really look in practice?
I think that if a project is identified, it needs to obviously identify the stakeholders, of which the community stakeholders are one, and we all know that there are challenges in terms of who is, what is the definition of the community and who are the community leaders. I mean, there are examples on our eastern limb where it's very difficult to actually engage with the community because it's not clear who the actual community is that's claiming ownership of, for example, a particular tailings dump or tailings material. So I suppose the caveat is, proceed with caution, but I think identify those shareholders and stakeholders early on in the process, and then be transparent. As the process is developed, be transparent in terms of what is the value and also what are the challenges, because it needs to be, I think, admitted or acknowledged up front that repurposing and even retreatment opportunities are not necessarily easy and always all that economically viable. They are difficult opportunities. There's a very good reason why that value that we see actually has ended up in the tailings facility and wasn't recovered up front. Yeah. So I think that there needs to be an education in that process of engagement so that communities can understand and have realistic expectations of what is that value that's being added and how can we share in that value. And also understand that everybody needs to contribute. You have to add your own value so that the aggregate of the value creation is sufficient to sell a product.
Yeah. And I suppose it also would be commodity specific, right? As we chatting, I was thinking about it now. If you take, for example, mineral sands, the byproduct is placed directly behind as you finish mining. So you're taking a heavy mineral, you're depositing a tailing basically straight back to where you've processed, and there is no additional repurposing. So, but there could have been.
They could have been.
So
I don't think it's commodity specific. I think it's solution specific. Depends on what repurposing factor you're going for. Yes, in that example, you might not need to create a byproduct or reduce the volume of that material. But then again, if there is from mineral fines, sands, if there's a fine component that still be in the ponds and is creating a problem, and you need to find a solution for it, and there is hypothetically a need for bricks or for something in that area, you look at what's in there hopefully there's no thorium in it, or if there is, you isolate that and you still use the upgraded material for a certain product. So there's so many different considerations that you need to take. Yes, commodity specific, but solution specific as well. You've got options.
Yeah, good point.
Nicolene, on the Mining Pulse, we talk about the vital signs and what they tell us. So what are the vital signs for the tailings repurposing industry? Is it something that you see as becoming a future of the mining industry, or is it still just an academic conversation?
So there's definitely, in the last 5 years, and James, there's been traction in this, but in a South African context, I would say it is more of an academic at the moment. We don't have that many realists because of the complications with the hazard classification, for example, but all of those barriers that I've mentioned earlier. There are traction. There has been, the CSR is doing some work. There's been a new initiative started. It's the South African Circular Minings and Metals Initiative. So they are actually working on how do you bring circularity to mining and metals. So that's one of the concepts. Then globally, there's been conferences that specifically been held for repurposing. There are slots in conferences where we are dedicating time and conversation to saying, okay, these are the successes we've made. These are the learnings, and they are being shared. So there's definitely the social awareness around tailings and repurposing is really driving us forward, and there are more success stories being shared. So definitely, James, we can keep our finger on this pulse. It's growing on an academic level, in implementation level, locally and internationally at the moment.
Definitely gaining momentum.
Yes, 100%. If I may, I'll add a little bit to that. I think that, often when we think of the tailings, we focus on the past. So we look at a tailings facility that's already there, right? But I think, James, where the shift in industry is going to happen is that a mine owner would look at a resource and say, how do I extract the primary mineral value from this? And then, oh, by the way, what do I do with the tailings? That shift is going to be one from a primary mineral extraction shift to a complete value extraction, and how do I repurpose tailings? I don't want to spend money again to put tailings in motion or to process it. I want to do it once. I want to build a process that actually does this once and creates value right through, not only from what we would call primary products or resources, but into the tailings repurposed field as well.
Yeah.
The Europeans have this phrase called zero waste. And
Industrial
wouldn't it be great
symbiosis, all of that stuff. The Europeans have coined all of these terms already.
if we adopted that in mining and said, from the planning point of view, let's plan a mine with zero waste and see what we have to do to make that achievable.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you've spoken around a lot of these conferences and discussions that are being had. And I'm going to put you on the spot now. But by the time people are watching this, we would probably be halfway through the year. But if anybody wants to hear more about this, besides obviously engaging directly with yourselves at Fraser, where could they hear more about this, or hear papers or conferences specifically around this repurposing?
Okay. So I would say one of the best conferences that has been held within the space was held at MIT. It was the MIT Global Conference on Innovation, if I can remember correctly. And there's another one planned, I hear, for this year. So that's an excellent starting space. Other places is probably going on LinkedIn and just looking for repurposing. There's a lot of people claiming that they can make bricks, but a lot of this has been commercialized. But also go look at the Vales. And then, of course, like you said, contact us. We've done quite a lot of research. We have made quite a lot of international partners. There's a few international hotspots who is really taking this to the next level. So, if you want to get in touch with one of these companies that specializing in creating products from waste, where they say they can actually take something and create zero waste. They can take all of your tailings. Yes. So there's a lot of conversations happening. There's companies that's already on this road. So maybe I would say first entry point, get in contact with us or use the resources that I've just mentioned.
And to some of those that are out there who have done it, and Nicolene has put you on the spot, please reach out to us. Come and tell your story of how you've actually repurposed your tailings. We would love to tell your story together here with Nicolene and Phildre. And finally, for you, Nicolene, is if you had a message for the industry and the future of tailings repurposing, what would that be?
I would say, personally, I'm very excited. The fact that mining is now moving away from our all traditional linear economy. We have now fully embraced the circular economy. We're looking at how do we take less and make more. So I'm really excited about that. And then, like I've just said, the relationships that we're starting to build within the space, the communications, the people reaching out to us as Fraser and saying, you know what, I've got a technology. Can't we employ it somewhere to use some of your... So the conversations that we're having, I'm really excited about that. I'm happy that the industry is looking to give back. And yeah, I think we are really moving forward on this very interesting topic.
Phildre and Nicolene, this conversation's really shifted the way I think about the word waste. Because from what we've heard today, waste seems to be something that's increasingly a measure of how seriously a mining company takes its responsibility.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's really an opportunity. So in the future, I would imagine we would be ranking mining companies in terms of how much waste they generate. And if you want to be a top-tier mining company, well, make a mine that's got very little waste.
Yeah.
So from all the challenges that you have in terms of characterizing the waste and trying to make it economically feasible, to figuring out how to make partnerships with communities and using AI to help, I think at least there are challenges, but the industry seems to be moving. And as you were saying, it seems to be gaining momentum. If it's slowly in places, it's fine, but at least it's moving.
Yeah.
So we really want to thank you and thank our sponsor, African Mining IQ, for making this episode available. To our listeners, thank you for joining us on the Mining Pulse. Don't miss a single beat of the industry's critical readout. Subscribe to the Mining Pulse now on YouTube, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform. Please do leave your comments as they help shape these conversations that we have on the Mining Pulse. Stay tuned for the next episode as we continue tracking the heartbeat of Africa's mining industry. Stay sharp, stay informed, and stay on the pulse.